This is the UFO UAP Roundup for December 23rd, 2023. It has been a historic year for UFOs. And in this video, I'm just going to be suggesting some different podcasts and YouTube videos that I have come across and found to be interesting for one reason or another in the last couple weeks to few months that are giving us some different perspectives and data points of putting this whole story together for ourselves. We've got the UAP disclosure bill, an FBI insider's false flag alien invasion theory, CIA physicist who says he's the only one who knows how UFOs fly, a Stanford University's scientist views on UFO UAP, that's Gary Nolan, Navy Rear Admiral speaks out on USOs and disclosure, the Hill's UAP coverage angle, key facts people are missing, Chris Bledsoe's alleged UFO powers and connections to NASA, Army whistleblower and giant levitating stones, child prodigy rocket scientist has consciousness of UFO engine living inside him, and Colonel John Alexander on disclosure, and Philip Corso. So first up, we have the UAP disclosure bill. And basically what I want to say about this is if you haven't read up on this, then it's definitely worth looking at the details of it. I have a video that goes deep into what the UAP disclosure bill was. Basically what happened is they took everything out of it except the requirement that all of the government agencies hand over their UFO records, and there's nothing to force them really to do so. So some stuff will definitely probably come out, which should be interesting. And I believe that there's like a 3-month period or 180 days or something. So we might start seeing some of that stuff in 2024. Maybe they will, if there really are forces behind the scenes that are making disclosure happen, they will start to pull some strings and let out some more compelling stuff. The other thing is this opens the door for more whistleblowers potentially to come out now that there's not a so-called controlled disclosure and a review board, which was supposed to kind of review all the records and release them in a timely manner to the public. This may now open the door to what some are calling catastrophic disclosure, which is a way of making it like dramatic. But really, I think one way or another, this is going to come out, and this is a big step forward that we have some legislation, and we'll see how it all shakes out. I think we're going to see more whistleblowers come out, and that's one positive way. Since this didn't go down the way that they wanted it to, the disclosure forces inside the government and the military establishment, if you will, this will probably now open the door to other whistleblowers having to come forward to move this thing forward. On the Exopolitics Today, the Michael Salla channel, which I recommend you going to if you really want to get a full perspective to really try to understand what the truth is with this whole thing. It's worth checking out his videos. Now, some of the stuff that he has is really out there. It's hard to come to terms with, but at the end of the day, that might really be true, some of this stuff, because we really don't know. It may be stranger than we could ever suppose. And I do think that while he has some really out there stuff, like people saying they were on secret space programs and are there telepathically communicating with galactic federations and this and that, his books are also really well written and give good evidence and information that you can use to go do further research on, and you start to learn that there does seem to be a bigger picture here to this whole story. He had John DeSouza on, and basically all I want to say here is anything you hear from this guy John DeSouza, who's claims to be a former FBI agent, I would take it with a grain of salt. His book is interesting. He has two now. The first one was The Extra Dimensionals. He has some different perspectives, and I think it's healthy to see many different sides of the coin, if you will. And he really comes at a different angle. I mean, he thinks David Grush and the whole thing is fake, and he thinks that Roswell was fake and all this stuff. So it's interesting to listen to him. But one thing there was a bit of a red flag for me where he was basically saying that he believes that God has a chosen people, kind of like just weird language like that, which I'd never heard from him before. So it kind of seemed to really contradict his whole extra dimensional universal outlook on ETs or extra dimensionals, aliens, UFOs. So I don't know how much weight I can put behind what he says. I'll still listen to him from time to time, but this one really rubbed me the wrong way. Go check it out for yourself. Here we have a CIA physicist, or who was a CIA physicist, and this is an interesting one to check out on Danny Jones. This guy, my impression of him was that he has been in a lot of inner circles. He's definitely seen and heard some stuff which we would never have access to. So it's worth hearing his stories. On the one hand, he's a very smart person and physicist who apparently has a warp drive formula that he's trying to get patented and all this that he says will explain how UFOs work. So it's interesting to hear his views on that. It's also kind of interesting to see how he says he's part of, or was part of, Bohemian Grove, and how he says he's in very elite circles. So when we think about kind of the cabal network and the secret societies network, we have to think that he may be somehow connected to that. And so some of the things he says may we gonna have to take with a grain of salt. For example, when Danny Jones asks him if he thinks that we've gotten anywhere with UFOs, reverse engineering them, he says, "Oh, they've never figured it out." So either he just doesn't know, um, or he is basically just being a cover for what he knows is real. Now, of course, I don't know that man-made UFOs are real, but that seems to be what the case is. And at least Michael Herrera, who was someone who witnessed a man-made UFO, and he has testified to the Senate Intelligence Committee in Congress in private settings. And I have a video about Michael Herrera and all the information he shared where he witnessed a man-made UFO that was transporting humans to be trained with psychic abilities to fly the UFOs. And that the whistleblower he worked with, who took him to a facility, said they shoot down the UFOs. He says getting around the UFOs is the most boring thing of it all, that there's more, and having to do with consciousness and other technologies. So who knows? That's what, someone like Michael Herrera, who is literally working apparently directly with David Grush and is sort of in his team of people who know the real deal about this. We'll find out hopefully soon enough. But this one, it was a cool one, definitely worth checking out. This came out interesting. This was a interview with Gary Nolan and Ross Coulthart. So, Gary Nolan's an interesting figure in all this, and I think things are very nuanced, and people always want to, with every one of these UFO figures, people want to say he's either this or he's either that. She's either on this side or that side. What I find that the truth is that things are more nuanced than that, and people may be authentic and genuine and good intentions a certain percentage, and another percentage might be compromised. They might not have a choice there. We don't know what kind of conversations have happened behind the scenes. That's the kind of impression that I get from Gary Nolan. I think he has put himself out there enough that he's either being used a tool for a controlled disclosure, or he really has always been outspoken and pursued this, and then intelligence and whoever's behind covering this all up brought him in and said, all right, you can keep doing this, but you can't say this and you can't say that, and you need to give us this. And that's what I feel like happened here. And again, this conversation is actually a year and a half old, but for some reason they put it out now, and they're talking about this and that. Again, one of the points that stuck out to me was Ross Coulthart talking to Gary Nolan and saying, he doesn't even frame the question, just say, "Do you think that there's man-made UFOs that are being flown?" He says, "No, now you don't think that it's possible that we could have reverse engineered these to being functioning. I mean, that would just be absurd. That would just be insane." And to his credit, Gary Nolan doesn't just agree with him. Gary Nolan says, "I don't think so. I really doubt it, but it's possible. Who knows? It's possible. Who knows?" So that tells me that maybe, he is sincere in all this. I mean, he is apparently partnering with David Grush. So, and he's an experiencer himself, which you also find out from this interview, which I never knew before. Never really listened to Gary Nolan talk that much, but he had contact experiences as a kid. And so, who knows? This one is definitely worth checking out. I don't, I hope that people just don't fall for a trick that's going to be, all right, yep, here it is. We've been collecting them, but we haven't figured it out, and we're still moving bit by bit. It's so complex we don't even know. And there's been very limited contact, but we haven't even been able to really understand the contact, where really the truth behind it all could be all of these conspiracies that we've been seeing. There's been contact, Eisenhower in 55 or 54 or whatever, this covert group that's been making UFOs and using them to basically do international drug trade, human trafficking, who knows what off planet, that there's secret space programs. There's this whole deep rabbit hole of what's possible and what people are actually saying and what there's some evidence to corroborate that we have access to. And this is part of what David Grush coming out and saying. He hadn't isn't necessarily, that's probably the only thing that David Grush came short on saying, is that there's man-made UFOs being used for illegal operations. It's the only part that he left out, and maybe that is the deepest secret of all this. Maybe if they can keep that part out and let everything else out, then they'll be okay. This unknown network of organized crime, if you will, of this illegal UFO recovery and reverse engineering program that we know exists now. It's just a matter of figuring out who it is, and hopefully that will happen. So this one's good to check out. Here is on the Sean Ryan clip, and this is something a little bit different, a little bit off the radar. This is an ex-Marine who has come out, whistleblowed, and said that he was at a secret underground base because him and his father were doing some contracting to build something there for them, a shooting range underground or something. And he witnessed a monolithic stone slab that weighed tons just levitating in the air. And then he looked, and there was a huge sphere stone levitating in the air. And then when he had come back from going down wherever he went in the underground base, everything was gone. So hear from him. It's interesting. It kind of makes you think, what else is going on, and if this is really true, and someone like this is willing to go under oath in Congress and say, yeah, I was at such and such base and I saw that. There's technologies that are not being overseen, and who knows? It's an interesting one to check out. Here, coming down onto a more grounded side of it, or even underwater side of it, we got my man Tim Gallaudet. Now, he is great. He's very very positive dude, and props to him of being one of the few military people who are willing to come out, attach their names to this, and say, hey, this is real. David Grush is legit. Let's move forward, because everyone's kind of just frozen. Like, nobody wants to do it. There's been no really big names coming out and doing anything. So props to Tim Gallaudet on the Ryan Graves podcast, and he's one of the people who testified in the famous hearing in July of what he saw as a pilot. They talk about some things, and basically Tim Gallaudet is going to be exploring underwater and searching for UFO activity, and apparently some huge anomaly over by the Catalina Island on the West Coast, which has been known for a lot of mysterious UFO activity for many decades. And some have even said there's some kind of crystal pyramid underneath the water there. And interestingly, Gallaudet says they found some anomaly structure underneath in near Catalina Island, and that they want to go there and check it out, and that he's working on doing that. Very interesting. I think he's going to be an important voice. And you saw recently, News Nation clipped him as saying, "There's contact with non-human intelligence, and this needs to come forward." So, definitely big ups to him. He's coming through. We need people like him coming out, because it's one thing to have so and so and so and so, but when you have high level people like him being vocal about it, he's not only a retired rear admiral of the Navy, but he's on the board of all of these top oceanic organizations. He's worked at the Pentagon for decades, so he's legit. So we need more people like him. Moving on here, if you're following The Hill, which is one of these alternative media companies, you can check out how they're covering the story. It's interesting. They have softened up to it a bit, but they're still just not covering the facts as they need to be covered. And they're still missing big parts of the picture and laughing about it. So hopefully the media will wake up to this at some point and realize that this is the biggest story ever, really. And aligned to that, some facts that people are missing, and I'll just say it here, because on these two podcasts, the Theories of Everything, Ross Coldhart, this individual, Kurt Jamungal, who has a huge following. So, millions of people are turning into his channel and getting educated about this, because, our media can't do a proper job of it. And he's basically, from his perspective, he's like saying, so let me get this straight. David Grush basically heard through the grapevine that there was this, and he claims this, and he's skeptical about it. But it's like, dude, and then before I comment on the people below here on the UAP Crossfire, which is from podcast UFO live shows from my man Martin, who actually I just had him on my podcast, and he's a great guy, and he's spoken to about 600 UFO experts on his podcast over the last 10 plus years. Fascinating to talk to him. But he has this UAP Crossfire show with 3 other individuals, and they're older guys, older generation, and they're basically very skeptical of David Grush, and they don't even call him Grush; they call him Grouch. And so not to throw any bad energy over that way, because Martin's show is amazing, but I think that it just shows you how people are not realizing what David's situation is. I mean, he's not just some military guy coming out saying something. He spent 4 years. First of all, he was tasked by the government UAP task force that was forced by law to investigate the whole UFO thing. He was the one going to look into special access programs. He realized something was going on. People started talking to him about it that wanted it to come out. He spent 4 years gathering all his evidence. He had 40 witnesses with firsthand experience on the program some are still on the program, which is what he said under oath to Congress months ago. Now, he did that, and in those 4 years and 40 witnesses, he made sure that he wasn't being fooled and deceived. And one of the things that these older guys are saying on UAP Crossfire is that they think he's been fed misinformation. And I just have to say, while that's possible, I don't think that we can really speculate or make claims like that And we have to give this guy credit. He was a 14-year officer. He was working at the National Reconnaissance Office, which is known as the most secretive group in the whole military governmental complex. He is an intelligence officer. He was at a very high level. So someone who does that, I would trust them to know if they're being fed misinformation or not. And if he would spend 4 years figuring out before he would come forward and blow the whistle, I have to put my faith in that he is a good intelligence officer to not have been fooled by this whole everything that he was told. So I think that argument's very weak. And we have to give him the benefit of the doubt that he wouldn't be in that position if he wasn't a good intelligence analyst. And certainly he would have done his best work before putting his whole career on the line, putting everything on the line for him, facing prison time, facing fines if he's making this up or whatnot. But aside from that, also, and this goes back to this whole conversation here of Kurt Jamungo saying, "Oh, he heard through the grapevine, and then, but like he got approved to let it out, but that by getting it approved, then that means that it's not classified and this and that." Everything's just trying to shed light on like why we shouldn't believe David Grush. Anything but just, of course, but just realize that this is for real, and the dude just came out and said it, and something's got to happen. Something's got to happen now because it needs to stop, and we need to get this technology out to make the world better. Because that's what this whole thing is about. And really just so people can know what the reality is on a deeper level and not just be fooled into thinking what our reality is in a more limited sense. So not only did Grush have the 4-year investigation and the 40 witnesses, he submitted everything to the Inspector General of Intelligence. The former Inspector General of Intelligence is his lawyer choosing to represent him. David Grush put all his evidence in, made his claims. They spent 16 months reviewing his case, had his witnesses come in, vetted all his information, and then the current Inspector General of Intelligence marked his case credible and urgent and allowed him to come forward with certain information, leaving the more sensitive classified national security stuff out. So you're telling me that that individual is just playing some game, or that he was that incompetent to just look at these fake Fed stories and fake documents that David Grush had and fake witnesses saying, yep, we've done alien autopsies. Yep, we have crash retrievals. Yep, we have this. And then he decides to stamp it credible and urgent? Is he that incompetent? The Intelligence Inspector General of Intelligence? These are the facts we have to understand. This is not just some guy coming out, yes, military, yes, high level, but he's just saying it. Oh, we just got to take his word for it. Guys, we got to look at the facts, man. He had to go through all that, multiple people putting their reputation, their highly prestigious careers on the line. His current lawyer would not attach himself to this if it wasn't real. Chuck Schumer would not respond by making a bill saying these agencies and contractors need to turn over UFO technology and non-human intelligence of biologics. I mean, who would put that in a law if they didn't know? And the Senate Intelligence Committee is who would know, because all those whistleblowers have come to them and told them directly. Marco Rubio, look at what he said. This is someone, these are people that the media should be talking to. Marco Rubio's had people come to him and tell him all this crazy stuff. So, this is what people are missing, and that's my 2 cents on that. Unfortunately, some of these bigger channels that are not maybe studying the nitty-gritty details and breaking it down are perhaps just misleading people, but the truth will come out. So moving along here to other areas, we have Chris Bledsoe on Danny Jones. This one's worth watching. Very interesting. This guy had an experience in 2007 with some orbs, and since then he has had healing experiences with them. He claims to even have healed other people. Fascinating story. Of course, it's hard for us to just take his word for it, but he's put himself out there. He has a lot of videos that are really compelling. He seems like the real deal. Check it out for yourself. What I found very interesting about it was when he started having these experiences, people high up in NASA started working with him, and he has the evidence. He has the names. He drops the names of the people, and these people told him some very interesting stuff. They stayed very close with him. They knew the phenomenon was real. They said that every time something gets launched into space, something swims up to it. They He was talking to one of these high up people, Hal Povenmire, who, I mean, this was like the gem from this whole 3 hour podcast. There's so much other things in it, but this was the gem for me. Hal Povenmire, who is the guy in NASA who mapped the moon. He mapped the moon for the Apollo missions, and I haven't 100% verified that, but this is what Chris Bledsoe said. Pictures of Hal Povenmire. They were family friends, spent holidays together, all this stuff. And Hal Povenmire told him that there's ancient ruins on the moon, artificial structures. Told him, the guy who mapped the moon for the Apollo mission. So interesting there. And the moon is a fascinating subject. I have a lot of research and notes on the moon. I eventually will be making a video to share all that. Now, this is where we get on the wild side here. This is the Michael Salla show again. And this is David Adair. David Adair is very interesting, and he used to be on the Gaia Cosmic Disclosure show, and he's always had some interesting perspectives. He was supposedly a child prodigy rocket scientist, and then the Air Force kind of recruited him to help them figure stuff out. He saw some UFOs. He saw some stuff at Area 51, and kind of just faded away, and then came out later in life. He worked with Curtis LeMay. Apparently, in other interviews, he's talked about how he was very close with the Armstrongs, with Neil Armstrong's mom, and Neil, and he hinted at that something happened on the moon mission where he knew Neil well enough that like something just wasn't right. So it's interesting. He's always been interesting to listen to, and he comes on this podcast, and this is way out there, man. I mean, I mean, he could be totally telling the truth. So not trying to make fun of him or anything, but it's just funny to me to break down what he actually says in this podcast. He basically says that he was taken underground in Area 51 when one of these high up Nazi paperclip scientists that was working inside the U.S. military during the whole kind of heyday of the UFOs, and probably when they were reverse engineering everything. He was taken there, and he saw what was a UFO engine, and he basically put his hands into these slots, and then this engine was a consciousness, and he had a whole conversation with it. Now it sounds wild, right? And it is, but let's think about it. If you were super, super, super advanced, right? You would think that, we're already making artificial intelligence. So for an engine to have artificial intelligence or to have a consciousness, that would actually make sense. But of course, it's hard to just hear this guy say that he had this experience. And this supposedly talked to him, supposedly was 13 billion years old, and then supposedly transferred it its consciousness into him. And this is what he talks about in this interview. So it's wild. Check it out. And it's hard to believe, but at the same time, it's like it could be stranger than we ever even thought that it could be. And last here, we have a good episode on the Weaponized podcast with somebody named John Alexander, who's very interesting. He was a Army colonel, and he actually started this whole kind of organization in the Army that started to explore all this different psychic phenomenon and remote viewing. And he was on a legitimate remote viewing team, and he went deep with all that stuff. And that movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats, was a satire based on him, but they were serious. They were studying UFOs. They were studying everything, and basically, I never really seen him talk much, but he came on this podcast and spoke about what he thinks about everything, and it's great to hear his perspective on it. He tells us that it goes beyond just the physical nuts and bolts of the UFOs. There's a whole nother psychic consciousness element to it, which seems to be the pattern we're seeing emerging here. And he also talks about the Philip Corso story. And Philip Corso wrote the book The Day After Roswell. People have, I think, not taken his story as, you know, important as it is. He was in a high level in the Pentagon, came out, said he got the Roswell files in the 60s. He saw gadgets that had been recovered from the crash, but they never figured out. He worked with industry to kind of reverse engineer them, and it kind of sped along certain industries, things like laser beams and fiber optics and night vision goggles. So that's a whole rabbit hole. Some people say it's not true, but there's no proof that it's not true. Yes, like some people have denied it, but even in the book, Corso says he didn't want them to have any idea that it was coming from the army. That was the whole point, was to like clandestinely seed it secretly, like a microprocessor that they found, and then kind of almost make the companies feel like they figured it out on their own, but while giving them that boost because they wanted to keep it secret. So people don't take that into consideration, but actually, to his credit, John Alexander does mention that. And John Alexander knew him, spoke with him, said he was who he was. He verifies for us he really did hold those positions. And he makes a good point. He says, you're never going to get 100% on everything. And some of the stuff that he said was inaccurate, but he actually says it was minor inaccuracies, like the names of places and stuff. So if you haven't read The Day After Roswell, I really highly recommend it. It's a great read. It's what actually got me into taking this subject seriously, because here was this Army colonel who worked at the Pentagon writing a book saying, yep, here's everything I learned from reading the Roswell files. And he even saw an alien. He says he saw an alien in a crate when he was younger while he was on a base. And he also even says that he had another encounter later in life on a military base with a extraterrestrial or alien, whatever it was, that communicated with him. So it's interesting to hear John Alexander vouch for him and also say where he can't really verify some things he calls the Corso conundrum. So that is everything I've got for you today. So hopefully you'll go check those out, and hopefully this will speed you along a bit your journey to figuring out the truth about this for yourself. It's a fascinating subject, and we shall see with the new year what we will learn. I'm hopeful. I think that we are going to see these technologies come out. I have faith in the people that know what's going on and want to make this right. I think we're on the upswing of the evolution of the consciousness of humanity, and it's time for a return to a golden age and better times. We've been through the darkness. We've been through the control of the dominators and the wars and the subjugation of peoples throughout the world for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years now, empires, and we're entering new times now. We're going to get these energies brought out to the public, and we're going to see a better world, and that's what I believe, and that's what I'm optimistic for. I think ultimately what we believe is what shapes the mass reality anyway. So if we all can have faith in that, I think we'll be all right. No, nevertheless, whatever you fall on that, it's fascinating just to explore this subject. So I hope this gives you any bit of guidance or insight in researching this on your own. And I'll have some new videos coming out soon. So check back for those. I'll be going deep on the origins of the UFO cover up. I did a lot of research into that, looking at primary source documents, declassified documents, and I think I basically got the whole story from what we can tell. And you can kind of see how it all started back in 1947 and 1948 with the secrecy and the cover up. So happy holidays, happy New Year's to you here if you're on this calendar and time zone. Here I'm in the U.S. and New York, and yeah, we'll probably see you next year. So take care, and let's hope for the best here.